Exactly. It's great to see you, Andrew.
Great to see you, Dr. Mark, and welcome. And we're here to celebrate your new course, which starts next Sunday.
It does. It starts this coming Sunday, doesn't it?
It does. It starts on November 24th, and it's called Unique Self 2.0, Intimacy, Eros, and Evolutionary Love. So I guess my first question for you, Dr. Mark, is unique. What is unique? What is self? And what is 2.0?
Those are all great questions. So let me just say one thing. First off, it's great to see you, and please feel better, my friend. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yay. So th- the most significant question that a person ever has to ask is, who am I? And who are we? And that's the question of identity. Who am I and who are we? Now, that question links to two other questions. One of them is, where am I and where are we? And what kind of universe do I live in? Or what's my universe story? And from there, I can get to the third question, which is, what should I do? Right? Or what ought I do? Right? Should, ought. Is there an ought? Right? What ought I? Is there something I need to be doing for which I'm held accountable? Right? Like I actually need to do something. It's not just a descriptive reality, it's a prescriptive reality. There's an invitation, and there's also, right, reality needs something from me. But the place you always have to start, and that's what this course is about, is who are you? Now, one of the things, the very few things that Yuval Harari and I that we've talked about, the populist historian, agree on is that we both read Charles Taylor's book and had it by our bedside for a long time. Charles Taylor's book, Sources of Self. And Charles Taylor kind of talks about what he called inescapable frameworks, that we all live in inescapable frameworks. And we generate reality from those frameworks. And how I understand myself, who I am, determines everything. It determines my politics, right? It determines my spirit. It determines my sexing. It determines my creativity. It determines how I go into depression. It determines my early childhood trauma. It's everything. We have to, and we can't make up an answer to that, my friend, right? We can't say, let's just declare an answer. So what we've done in unique self theory, right, it is actually over decades tried to understand all of the world's great traditions, pre-modern, traditional, modern, and postmodern, that address this issue of self. And we've emerged from there with what we think is the most beautiful, accurate response to this inquiry of who are you? Now here's the thing, Andrew. So about, 12, 13 years ago, I was greatly privileged to write a book called Your Unique Self, which I was very, very excited to write and to share, and which actually changed the conversation in the Enlightenment communities around the world over many years. And Ken was my dear friend, Ken Wilber. Him and I had talked through and kind of argued through and debated through a lot of this for about a decade. He wrote a beautiful kind of introduction and afterword. And then we did actually, in the integral world of integral theory, we did an entire academic journal. Integral then had a formal journal edited by Sean Hargens. We did an entire academic journal on unique self, on this unique self theory. And it became a new chapter, both in world philosophy, for people who did integral theory, but in transpersonal psychology and personal psychology. And it was a wonderful moment. But between 2011 and 2014, it's deepened enormously, right? In other words, in a certain sense, an entirely new expression and understanding and depth and joy and precision and passion has emerged, which is Unique Self 2.0, right? It's a much deeper response, right, to this question. So it builds on the book. And what we'll probably do is in the first session, we're not going to recapitulate the original book anyplace. And at the same time, you'll be able to step into the course if you haven't read the book. So what we're going to do probably the first session is we're going to do a kind of a new formulation that doesn't appear in the book, a new formulation of this question of who are you? And we're going to talk about kind of 6 selves all in one session.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going
to can I go back a little bit and
please, yeah, you got it, brother.
Ask questions. So yeah, first of all, I'm interested in your conversation with Ken. And probably I imagine the conversation had to do with something like the Buddhist notion of no self, and then the more Western notion of, of soul. So I'm curious about that, and and I'm also curious about what is this quantum leap and
yeah, no, great. Well, let's. I mean, there was an original book that I read that I read. I did read it actually, but I also wrote it, right, called Soul Prince, which I wrote in, I don't know, 1999 or 2000, and it used the word soul. It also used the word unique self, but it was operating within the classical soul tradition. I made a decision, and Ken was deeply involved in that decision. Ken said to me, Ken read Soul Prince, and he said, you use the term unique self. I like that term. And so we were deeply involved in this conversation, and we used unique self because unique self bypasses getting stuck on confused understandings of what soul means, right? So unique self works whether I'm a kind of classical Vajrayana Buddhist, or I'm a Kashmir Shaivite, or I'm a Shakta Tantra practitioner, or I'm a secular humanist, right? Or I'm a kind of a classical Christian of one of 17 varieties, etc. And its unique self, actually, it's a very precise and appropriate term. Now, Ken was very committed, I would say, at that moment, in a very beautiful way, to kind of the classical notion, right, in Buddhism, which speaks, of course, about some version of, kind of no self, right, and of course a separate self, right? Those that kind of classical kind of separate self, true self, realization. And we went through a couple of years of very, very deep conversation. And one of the things that emerged from that conversation is that actually, even in the great lineage traditions, they went beyond true self. And you can kind of miss it, right? There's actually another deeper strain that's kind of hidden. And so I shared with Ken much of my thinking around this, but we didn't actually break through, Andrew, it's a crazy story, until I actually sat at Oxford for about a year and a half and wrote like 1,400 pages, and I only published a very small part of it, but at 1,400, 1,500 pages on this, what I called non-dual humanism, right? Radical Kabbalah was, right, that's exactly right. So there's 2 volumes, which are about maybe a third of the material, right? And so Ken, in his, incredible beauty and depth and wonder, Ken basically read through like all of the pages in a few nights and marked them all up. And actually, they started circling around what he called the loft and boulder. That's how I met Zak Stein. That Zak, Clint Fuse kind of gave Zak, that Ken's marked up copy of this, right? And Ken wrote me and he said, okay, now I get what you're talking about. He said, this is a major lineage. This is not a human potential idea. This is a very, very deep, right, realization of this highest vision of enlightenment, which is very different than the classical Buddhist one. And how do we bring this to the table? And that's, of course, Ken's beauty. He was, madly excited about it. And then the conversation deepened between us. And then lots of the formulations emerged that appear in Unique Self Volume 1. And Ken actually, he had started something very beautiful called the Integral Spiritual Center. And so he asked me to come and give, I guess, what they called a keynote address, right, to about, 60, 70 of the kind of spiritual teachers he had gathered. And that was really the first place that unique self kind of entered the zeitgeist, because there were kind of 50, 60, 70, kind of teachers who were kind of classical no self teachers, pretty much. And so we did a kind of very deep unique self dive, right, in trying to understand, what that means. And I'll maybe share with you one moment. This might be helpful for people, because I know we're doing just a short talk, and then any questions you have with delight. And I know I'm avoiding going into the actual content itself because I want to wait till the course for that, but I'll just give you one example. There's a very beautiful man named Jumpo Roshi that some of the people here who are, listening may recognize or may have practiced with him. He may have been your teacher. Now, I love Jumpo. And there was one moment, I think this dialogue is actually online on our website, where Jumpo's kind of, offering very beautifully in his beautiful, wild, deep style, and his, what he called it, Mondo Zen, his kind of challenge to, unique self-thinking, and kind of just saying, no. This is nonsense. This is just some strategy of the ego, which is usually what the Buddhist teachers say. This is a very sophisticated strategy of the ego that you're calling uniqueness. And it's really just separate self in disguise. So I said to him, I'm going to give you a 2-word pointing out instruction, which will give you immediate enlightenment, right? And you will have a direct realization of, unique self. And he's like, I couldn't be. I said, are you ready? He said, I'm ready. He said, 2 words, direct transmission. He said, okay. I said, you ready? He said, ready. Okay, ready? Ready. Jumpo Roshi. That was it. Jumpo Roshi. Unique self. And he got it immediately. Meaning, Jumpo Roshi's not just separate self, character, personality. No, there's something called Jumpo Roshi, which is a unique incarnation of Buddha nature, right? That's not just personality, Jumpo Roshi, right? And it was like immediately, we both got it. So that's unique self, Jumpo Roshi. Like, oh, right? And it was a very beautiful moment. And you kind of like, right? And again, those of you listening, right? Either you got it or you didn't. If you didn't, don't worry, right? But if you did, you got like, oh, you get this immediate access to this quality of reality, which is not separate self-constricted personality seeking and craving. No, it's Jumpo Roshi, right? And it's very beautiful. And so that's what we're going to be. If you can't access that Jumpo Roshi that's you will create the wrong life. You will make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, because you're not running your own life. Your neighbor is. Right.
So what's the difference between, let's say, the unique self and the mechanical machine man, as Gurdjieff called it, the self that is not unique, that is just, a lot of us feel that we're very unique, but we're not as unique as we think, because we've downloaded all this information and behavior and et cetera, et cetera. But obviously we are unique. But
it's a great question. It's a great question. So you've actually asked 2 questions, right? And your questions always, right, are exciting for me, your inquiries. So let's split them into 2. Let's answer the machine one second. And then you've obviously downloaded all these other things into you, which are not you, so you're not unique, which is your second inquiry. So let's disambiguate. Let's split them. Let's do the second one first. So take something like free will. Okay? People who say, I have free will, right? I have free will. They're dangerous. You have to first assume you don't have free will. That's what you have to say, okay, no, actually, what you have to first do in order to be an alive and good and gorgeous and beautiful human, you have to first say, okay, no, I have no free will. And then figure out all the forces that have taken your free will. Your parents,
I'm in the matrix, Neo's
your parents, I'm in the matrix, right? What are all beautifully said, love, right? Exactly. What are all the hidden, my parents and my society and my culture and my body type and, my genetic, figure out all the things that have taken your free will away. Because if you don't get those, you won't be able to subvert them. You won't be aware of them. You'll just think, oh, I just have free will. No. Actually, there's all these forces acting on you. So that in order to assert your free will, you first assert your non-free will. I have no free will. And then you literally do a practice where you go through, here's the 20 reasons why I have no free will. There's all the antecedent causation. Then, after all of that, I have free will.
Welcome to Parallax, the resurrection of truth, beauty, and goodness. Parallax, a media war engine. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation. Parallax, mad philosophers and tantric demigods. Parallax, totem for an unknown god. Parallax, philosophy and the return of the matriarch. Parallax, the end of the meaning crisis. Parallax, the whispering daemon in your ear. Parallax, the god of wisdom, wine and love. Parallax, your home for superior publications, podcasts and courses. Parallax, join us today.
Right? And that's called a point of will, a point of free will. Okay. And I'm by the empathetic. I want to get you in bed, Andrew, with a warm blanket and, some like hot tea and lemon as you're kind of struggling through. So
But my voice is very sexy, don't you think? When I'm
very sexy. I can feel people swooning around the globe. I can. Okay. Krista, can you feel that? Krista's with us. Anyone swooning in Holland over there? I think so. There's a lot of swooning.
Absolutely.
Swooning is you try and hold on there, Krista. So that's one. So the same thing is with uniqueness. You first start with all the ways that I'm actually not unique. That I'm the same. I'm the same in many, many, many ways. Then after all of the sameness, and then Jhumpa Roshi and Andrew Sweeney, right? Krista Josepha, right? In other words, I'm actually not just a personality with a particular mechanical structure. And this brings us to the second point, which is the first thing you said, but it's our second point, which is I'm not a machine. I actually have personhood. And I want to just kind of touch that for a second. One of the tragedies of classical Enlightenment traditions is that they dismissed the personal. So, for example, my friend Andrew Cohen, who taught for many, many years, and is still teaching in a thing he calls Manifest Nirvana. So Andrew, who, by the way, everyone was like, wow, we love Andrew. He's doing, What is Enlightenment magazine, and everyone wanted to be in the magazine, and everyone was very sweet. And then he kind of had a big conflict in his community, and things kind of fell apart, and everyone kind of disappeared. So that's not the way people should be, right? Andrew's gone through kind of a big process. He wrote a book about his experience, and he's started to teach again. And everyone gets to kind of revirginate and gets to kind of own their shadow, if that's appropriate, and kind of take the next step. So I want to just, bless Andrew in this next stage of his teaching. So Andrew wrote a book called, what was it called? I don't remember what it was called, but in his book, it was called Evolutionary Enlightenment. And he gave it to me back in the day, and I read it. And he used about 50 times in the book, he used the word personal. And virtually, not fully, but virtually every time the word personal was used as a pejorative. And actually his original community was called the Impersonal Enlightenment Fellowship, right? And at some point, Andrew and I were talking, it might have been in a public dialogue, and he said, wow, right? You were right about unique self, right? And it was very beautiful of him, right? And I think Andrew himself, made some important contributions at a certain moments in my life, in kind of clarifying his own experience of the evolutionary impulse. So I want to kind of really, honor that in a beautiful way. But his book was kind of the classical Enlightenment community. And the classical Enlightenment community was what? Impersonal Enlightenment Fellowship. And the word personal is a bad word. Okay, that's a very big mistake. Right?
And you have to give up and deconstruct and undo and destroy the self.
And all the practice.
That is invited teaching, isn't it? It just becomes
and he was doing, like many other teachers. There's a zillion teachers out there doing that, right? He was doing the overwhelming majority of teachers are doing that, like 99%. And some people do it in a very sophisticated way, like Rupert Spira, but basically it's some version of, Buddhistic Advaita Vedanta. Right. And it's about deconstructing kind of that experience of the personality. But there's a conflation and confusion between personality and personhood. Right. So when I said Jhumpa Roshi, I wasn't talking about personality. I was actually doing a pointing out of personhood. right? So the assumption is that the personal lives before the impersonal. So there's the personal, then I get to the impersonal, and now I'm realized. No, there's level one personal, then there's the impersonal, then there's the personal beyond the impersonal. And that's what we're going to talk about, right, this Sunday. And it's everything. It changes everything. It changes everything, right? Let's get personal, right? And this, right? I mean, if you'd want to, and we're going to do every 3 months, we're going to do one of these 3-week kind of deep dives, a 3-week deep dive. It's my dear friend, beloved Sally Kempton, Swami Durgananda, who passed and who I miss deeply, right? Used to do 3-week kind of darshans, 3-week sessions. And 3 weeks is a short amount of time, but it's enough to kind of grasp one dimension of the Dharma. So we're going to do short 3-week kind of takes. And I mean, I can't wait to start. This is like, we've been wanting to do this for a few years, and we're going to really try and just really like be at the very, very edge of like mad love and consciousness and realization. And really, let's go the next step together. Let's be the next Buddha. Let's unfold the next step, right? In the most serious, but also the most joyful, like madly joyful, alive way. Yeah, so we're excited.
So, again, so I'm still thinking about the notion of the self and how it's important and why it matters and why I want to hear you say why you think this is so vitally important, I guess, to personalize enlightenment, to make it a warmer thing, make it not a like a two worlds mythology, whereas this world is an illusion and there's some other world, or
all good. Yes, and yes. But so much more, right? In other words, I walk around. I have an experience of who I am. I live inside of that experience. Everything I do, all of the reality I generate around me, right, comes from a certain experience of myself. And that experience of myself is mediated through a story or an inescapable framework that lives in my heart, mind, body about who I am, right? And it's invisible. That's what's crazy. It's invisible. Can't see it. But it actually animates everything I do. Everything I do emerges from that invisible story. Now, you might think, right, well, what a fuck up on God's part, or what a fuck up on the universe's part, or what a fuck up on kind of consciousness' part, that it kept the most important thing invisible. Not true, right? One of the things we know about reality is that reality is a movement towards transformation. And you could actually say evolution equals a series of transformations. That's actually what evolution is. So when evolution reaches the human level is a series of transformations. Now, we know that's true. You and I both have kids, right? I have 4 kids, right? And so you remember the moment, I remember the moment with 3 of my kids, right, where they started to walk. Right? It's like, you remember, it's like this crazy moment, right, where your kid, first they can't move, and then they start to there's certain kind of movement. And in the beginning, when a baby's just born, they hold on to your finger really tight. So they have a very tight grip, like very, very, like almost from birth. So that grip loosens, they begin crawling around. And then there's this moment when your kid stands, right? And you hold them from behind for them to take their first steps, right? It's this incredible transformative moment. You've got this whole new range of motion, this incredible growth. So that transformation, and then I can run, and then I can skip, and then I can hop, and then I can become a gymnast. So those are a series of transformations along a particular vector, right, of development. But actually, right, the deepest vector of transformation is interior transformation. And according to most developmental studies, interior transformation stops in my late teens, early 20s maximum, where I just I'm studying, then I'm done. Then I basically stagnate until I die. Great. So that violates the very ethos of Cosmos. Cosmos, right, intends my transformation. And my transformation is intimate and personal, but I'm also part of it, not separate from the whole. So my personal transformation is also the transformation of the whole. That's actually why I'm fucking alive. I'm not alive to live forever because I'm not going to. I'm going to die. Right? You know, I would say for me, brother, in the last couple of years, like the boundary between life and death has become much thinner. Right? The membrane, I've seen so many people die that I know that I'm close to. Right? That the membrane has become so permeable. So my goal is not to stay alive, because I'm not going to stay. I want to embrace life, but at some point I'm going to die, and then I'm going to move to this whatever the next unfolding is. So what am I here for? So I'm clearly not here simply to accumulate wealth. I'm not here simply to accumulate status. So what am I here for? So you have to observe the nature of the organism. I'm here to transform. Right? The key to transformation is getting a more and more and more accurate bead, understanding, realization on who I am. And paradoxically, it's what brings more and more joy, more and more eros, more and more aliveness, more and more dance, more and more laughter, right? Is actually, and that's what the unique self story is. And if I can't see, for example, the six selves, I'm blind. I'm literally blind, right? You know, we need amazing grace, right? I was blind and now I see. And it's not because someone tapped me with a magic wand. It's because I actually had a lived experience and realization of, oh, that's the first self. Okay, I get that. That's the second self. They both live in me. Here's the third one. That's unique self. That's right. And it's so, I mean, this is not like a tangential thing. This is not like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have this little extra cherry on the pie of life? But this is life.
So the six selves is that
I'm not telling.
Was that?
I'm not telling. No way.
You're not telling us what it is. So there's a series of selves that we evolve into, basically.
Not telling. Sorry.
Not telling. Okay.
Gotta come to Sunday.
What's number 6? I want to go there first.
Not happening. but it's great, right? In other words, you just kind of get like it's. Let me try and say the last thing. There's no society that has tried to live without knowing who I am. Right? Now, societies might have given bad answers to the questions or partial answers, and they might have only considered their own culture and their own local, surface understandings, and they might not have done a good, worldwide study, and they might have only engaged one, right? So, of course, we got to do the deepest, most beautiful study using heart, mind, body, soma, etc. But the idea that I'm basically going to go through life and not figure out who I am in some way is idiocy, actually. And not to realize the intention of Cosmos is that what is uniquely human is that I go through a process of self-reflection in order to disclose my identity. Right? And as much as we like talking about how close we are to bonobos, generally because we think bonobos have a lot of sex, so we think, oh, we're like bonobos, right? Different conversation. As much as we like to talk about how close we are to bonobos, bonobos actually do not write poetry. Bonobos do not build hospitals, right? Bonobos do not actually go through developmental levels of consciousness. Bonobos do not realize in the same way enlightenment. Bonobos, are not avatars of compassion. Right. But we have the possibility to democratize greatness. That's what unique self is about. If you'd ask me in a word, Brother Andrew, and I know we should finish here so we can get you to bed, but if you'd ask me in a word, you'd push me to the wall, right? Gun to the head, right? 357 Magnum, right? Gafni, make my day. What is this about? Right? 4 words, right? It's the democratization of greatness, right? If people but we've lost our access to greatness. Right. We live in a world of outrageous greatness. We actually we relegate greatness to superheroes. But when the writer said we can be the hero of our own lives, what he really meant was, right? Heroism, I'm only a hero from the context of my unique self, right? And my heroic nature is unique. It's not generic, and it's my on-ramp to greatness. And no human being actually feels good about being alive or welcome in the universe unless they're the hero of their own lives. And I can only be the hero of my own life, like my friends, if I'm living my unique self. So that's what this is about.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I have more questions, of course, but did you think that's the right place to leave off this conversation? And
I think so, love. I think so. Maybe one last thing, with your permission. It's the only way to respond to the meta crisis, right? In other words, the meta crisis that we find ourselves in, this confrontation with existential risk. Existential risk is the risk that we won't exist as humanity.
Mm-hmm.
You can only respond to existential risk, the risk that I won't exist as humanity, by actually beginning to exist as a human being. So there's a personal existential risk. Do I exist as a human being, or am I a machine going through the motions? You know, Mumford, who you cited, or right? In other words, Man is a Machine, who's on the bookshelf right next to me. Actually, Zak's copy, right? But it's we all face our personal existential risk, which is we're going to go extinct without having been born. And it's only by responding to personal existential risk and up-leveling our understanding of what it means to be a human being that we can avoid both the death of humanity and the death of our humanity. We have to know what it is, and at the core of our humanity is unique self. That's the response to existential risk. It's actually introducing, it's engendering, it's telling the story, it's being the new story, it's crossing over to the other side. So I would say last sentence on my side, my friend, I would say, and directly, to anyone listening, with tender permission, it's a very simple question, right? Do you want to go? Are you willing to go the whole way in this lifetime? Are you willing to go the whole way in this lifetime? And I know that's scary, and that's a good reason to turn this off and say, fuck him, I'm not doing this, right? But those are the voices that live inside of us. Are you willing to go the whole way in this lifetime, to actually claim and be your greatness, not in a supercilious, placid, flaccid, inert new age way, right? Not as a kind of slogan, but actually as this full embodied realization of the prior condition of your being, right? Uniquely expressed, right? As the transmuted, the transfigured human being, right? That's what unique self is transfiguration. To become unique self is to be a transfigured human. It's the realization of the prior condition transfigured as you, right? It's like, that's what it is. It's not new age. It's not self-help. It's not human potential. It's about transfiguration itself. It's about becoming the God man. It's about becoming the God human with mad humility, like that.
Wonderful. So please come to the course and be transfigured and be moved and be greatly inspired by Dr. Marc's vision.
Poor Andrew's so sick.
Yeah.
Chicken. We're all going to be bringing chicken soup to Andrew. But Andrew, we're excited about this.